thank you everyone for joining the Breakthrough podcast. Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be looking at the life and hearing great advice from Greg Schenk, who in a second will tell a little bit about himself. He's a great real estate expert and he has a lot to tell even on the financial side of things. In this podcast, the Breakthrough podcast, we look through the life of various entrepreneurs, their breakthrough stories, their challenges, what they've learned from these challenges. And here in this wonderful episode, we're going to get to learn from one of the experts, especially in the real estate community. So Greg, thank you so much for having us here in your home. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, frustrated like many Americans, but as good as you can be.
That's awesome. Well, you mentioned many frustrated Americans, and during this time of stress, I'm sure a lot of people are realizing that maybe their jobs weren't as stable as they thought they were. Their bank accounts might not be as stable as they thought they were. And so somebody like you could really help them stabilize their situation, especially financially, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, financial literacy. But before we do that, could you tell a little bit about yourself just to help people understand who you are?
Sure. The biggest thing probably for me that I want people to know about is I came from pretty much nothing. Mm-hmm. We were a middle-class family. My parents got divorced when I was 12 years old. I had 3 younger siblings, and I didn't want to be a burden to my mom. So I literally started working when I was 12 years old. I started as a golf caddy in 5th grade, and I worked 2 jobs all through high school. I did every menial labor job that you could do, from being a busboy at $2.30 an hour at a pancake house, to mowing lawns, to babysitting, to snow shoveling, to caddying in the summer 6 days a week. Mm. So you name it, I pretty much did it.
Hustler.
I did enough that I could buy my own car the day I turned 16, and I was fortunate enough to get the Evans Scholarship, which was a scholarship from golf caddying, scholastics, and financial need to Ohio State, and that's what brought me to Columbus.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life when I got to college. I just knew I didn't want to be poor anymore. I really didn't. I was a basketball player who had gotten hurt, so I wasn't playing basketball in college. I thought maybe I'd get into sales because my dad and my uncles were both in sales in the insurance business. Part of me thought I'd want to be a teacher, and then I saw what teachers were making back then, and it was very, very little. So that really put the kibosh to that very quickly. And really a defining moment, one summer I had a chance to be a basketball camp counselor at a summer camp in New York, or be a pipe threader, threading pipes, basically a really tough job in a hot metal building. And I was going to make as much coaching the basketball camp in the pipe threader in 1 week that I'd make in the whole summer there. So I chose being the pipe threader.
Yeah.
And it was a really tough decision because it sounded great. I'd be helping kids, and it was really, really hard for me to go, which direction do I want to go? Mm-hmm. And so I chose that, and I realized I could save some money, and when I got out of school. So I got out of school, and there were no jobs here in Columbus. I actually got out a quarter early. I was so tired of being poor. I was a marketing major, a general business major, because again, I didn't know what I wanted to do, which I think most people don't have a clue with what they want to do. So I get out, there's no jobs here. I took a job with a company that moved me out to LA, lived in a hotel for 4 months. I was selling foreign car engine parts, pistons, bearings, valves, different things like that, something I knew nothing about, which I'd say most people, unless you're a car engine buff, would know nothing about. And I definitely knew nothing about it. And I said, it's the biggest challenge I could get. I said, if I can do this, I can do anything. Well, this company put me in a machine shop and taught me how to tear apart engines and put them back together. Somebody who had never even changed his own oil before, doesn't like to get dirty. So to say it was a challenge was a big thing. My friends would be laughing, saying, you're going to get fired in a week. It was that bad. I go to the home office, and the secretary had a piston sitting on her desk, and I said, what's that? And she goes, what do you mean, what's that? She goes, that's what you're going to be selling. And she goes, you're not going to last too long around here. So I mean, literally, I was really out of my element. So within 2 years, I became the number 1 salesperson in the country for them. Not because I knew anything about pistons, bearings, and valves, but because I listened to what other people wanted. And in LA, people drove a lot, and they didn't want to wait for their parts, so I got them to put a warehouse right downtown so people could get their parts quickly to these engine rebuilders, and the sales just skyrocketed. So it really did two things for me. Number one, it gave me an unbelievable amount of confidence that if you work hard enough on something, you can do anything that life throws in front of you. It may not be easy. It's probably not going to be easy, but you can do it if you want it bad enough. And number two, it's listening to what other people want. It's not about you, it's about them. And that's probably true in any... Serving people in any business role, not to be thinking of a salesperson's hat for those that are in sales, but to think what's important to them, that product or service. So that really helped me a lot. So I had one person out of the blue one day said, "Oh, I think you'd be good in commercial real estate." And I said, "What the heck's that?" Never had heard,
Here we go again.
Never had heard the term in my life. And I happened to fly back to where we grew up in Ohio and drove down here into Columbus to visit a friend, and I had a gut feel Columbus was going to grow. And I trusted my gut, and I left my other job that I had a company car, an expense account, and living on the beach in a beautiful area of Los Angeles to come back here. Had to even pay my own move to come back to work straight commission in commercial real estate.
Which you knew nothing about.
Which I knew nothing about.
And not to mention, because I remember talking about this to you earlier, you didn't know anybody here.
I had maybe 2 beer drinking buddies from college. I had no business contacts whatsoever. So it was really starting from scratch. But the big thing that I did that I think is important for your listeners is I set a very high goal. And I said, I'll give it 2 years. A goal has to have a time on what you want to do it for, whatever it is. So I said, I'll set this goal. I'll give it 2 years. If not, I'll move back. Now, almost every person that knew me thought I was nuts.
Did you know you had an opportunity to go back to that?
Oh, no. No, I mean, just move back to the coast, not with that company,
Gotcha.
but just to move back. But it was obviously a very difficult choice. I rode my bike on the beach every day. I had season tickets to the Lakers. You're in your young 20s and there's beautiful people all over the place. So it was a very difficult decision. But I'm a big believer in trusting your gut, your first instinct. And it felt right. And I wanted the challenge. I wanted to be all that I could be, which again, I think for your listeners is really important. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's making sure you're becoming the most you can be with what you've been blessed with. So I set this high goal, and within 2 years, I hit that goal. So I set another high goal, and another one, and another one. And 9 years later, I did the biggest deal in the state of Ohio.
Wow. So what were these goals? Were they financial goals?
They were mostly financial goals, okay? Because again, you're talking about somebody that came from nothing, that had no contacts, that knew nobody. Part of it were educational goals, learning the real estate business. I wanted to be the master of the market and the master of the process, meaning I wanted to know the real estate market and what I was helping people with better than anybody else, which meant studying it hours and hours every day, going out and seeing people. This was before internet and cell phones and computers, so this meant walking every building, every street in the territory, which back then we kind of had territories, of there. So to get to know every property owner and every leasing agent and getting to know it. So I did that. And I probably handed out 5,000 business cards in 2 or 3 years. I mean, that's all I did was give out. And people would joke that I was the mayor. I was shaking hands and giving out business cards on theirs. But that worked. I got to know people. They knew I was young. They knew I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I never bullshitted them. I was always very upfront that if I didn't have the answer, I would get somebody that was more senior in the company and get back to them. And so my reputation grew, and I got into some doors. You had to be very persistent, assertive, but not pushy. There was that very fine line when you're dealing in business. So I got in. It took me 5 years to my biggest client ever, which I did the biggest deal in the state with in my 9th year in the business, which was then Bank One, now Chase Bank. And I got in after being persistent and talking to them and sending them information, and I ended up doing a $20 million deal with them. And that gave me the wherewithal to leave the biggest company in the country that I was working with and go out on my own and work out.
Leave the real estate company.
Leave the real estate company to start my own business and really become a full-fledged entrepreneur.
Wow.
On there. And it was scary, very scary. But I had enough of a nest egg then. I paid off my mortgage on my house. And I said, I didn't start out wanting to do that, but I wanted to be able to dictate all my outcomes in life. And I thought that was a good way to do it. Now, I begged a lot of the people that I worked with to come work with me, and nobody wanted to leave that safe maven of working for the huge company.
Nobody was daring.
And some of those friends of mine, 25 years later, are still there. So they've done very well. But obviously, it's a much different challenge when you're with a company that's got 70,000 people than being a solo entrepreneur. So that was obviously a totally new experience, but it really said, okay, it's up to you. You'll get out of life what you put into it. And if you really look at yourself in the mirror and say, what do I want out of life? Everybody's blessed with different things. It's like, which skills do you want to polish the most? Okay. So what I really tried to do is polish those skills that I was good at. Number one, knowing the market, and number two, knowing the process and helping people, with that, whether it was leasing a building, buying a building, investing in a building. And then at the same time, when I went on my own, I started speaking, teaching, and training, and I developed 2 courses to educate realtors on those things. And nobody else in the state of Ohio was doing it. So I first did it in Ohio, and it went so well here, I started doing it nationally. About 5 years later is when I really started investing. And I know we're going to get into this in a little more detail, but what I really did is I said, you got to pay yourself first. So first, coming from very little means, I had a very low risk tolerance. I wasn't risky. I was very conservative. My business was already super risky because we never know when we're getting paid, if we're getting paid, if the assignment's going to go through. You could work 9 months on something and walk away with nothing if the company changed their mind. So that's more risky than 99% of people already are going to do. So because of that, the rest of my investments and savings and all that, I was pretty conservative on. So that was part of the reason why I paid off my mortgage, so I could keep my expenses down and very low. And then the rest of the funds that I would make, then I could be a little bit riskier in what I would put them in. So about 5 years after I started to speaking and teaching and seeing what other people were doing around the country, I got involved in first buying things like single family homes that were model homes for builders, a ground that they would do leasebacks on and pay, like I had a note on that. I bought an office building with a doctor, then I bought my own office building, and then I started getting into apartment complexes in partnerships with one group that I'm still investing with 20 some years later that have just been incredible. So the big adage there is paying yourself first. Every time I got a check, before I do anything else, I would take a minimum of 20%. If it was a small check, I'd take 20. If it was a big check, I would take 50 and put it aside to invest in one of these projects. And my goal was to get at least one every year that I was doing. And specifically when I got in with this partnership group, I was able to do that. And usually these were long-term holds, meaning 5 to 7 years minimum. And the goal was long-term appreciation as well as getting dividends, all that, what I call passive income. So
that's really popular nowadays.
Yeah, so doing that really gave me choices in life. And I tell my son, I've got a 16-year-old son all the time, I wanted to be able to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. That to me is total financial security and freedom. You have a lot of people that are unbelievably successful, but they got to be at that office 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. You could be the most phenomenal attorney, but you got to rack up those hours. You could be the greatest doctor, but you can't just take off Tuesday at 2 if you want to go see a friend. You've got to be there operating or do whatever you're doing, seeing people. So the great thing about being an entrepreneur as well as being in real estate is giving you that freedom if, big if, you're disciplined. So discipline, hard work, and sacrifice, which a lot of people don't understand, is huge.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today, specifically financial discipline in a way.
So I think that's the biggest thing, and learning that from a young age of wanting to get the things that that I didn't have, not to be a burden on my mom, and then have the freedom to do what I want, where I want, with whom I want. So really, for the last 25 years of having my own business, that's what I've really specialized on, is trying to do the best that I can for my clients, and then putting away that amount to buy more passive income, and at the same time, speaking and teaching around the country, educating others on what's possible in life.
That's awesome. So you mentioned, and I wanted to kind of expand on this point, goal setting. You mentioned you came into Columbus, had nobody to talk to, didn't know anybody, had no contacts, and you set these goals, and that was sort of like your path that you chose, your driving force. Could you help the listeners get a better idea of how they could implement goal setting into their life? What kind of strategies did you use to decide what's a reasonable goal? Because you don't want to set a goal so high that you can't reach it at all, you get disappointed, and then you get nothing done. What did you kind of use as your criteria to set up your goals?
Well, I think the first thing is each person's goals are their own. If you're younger, they're not your mom and dad's goals, your siblings' goals, your friends' goals. They're your goals, specific to you. It's got to be that burning desire of something you want to do, whether it's lose 10 pounds, run a mile in 6 minutes, whatever the case may be. So when I was a golf caddy, I would witness all these successful people that could take off on a Tuesday afternoon and go play golf. And I'm like, well, I want to be able to do that sometime. I played golf, I enjoyed it, and they'd all be driving these beautiful cars and always very happy. On Sundays, they'd be playing with their wives. And I thought, well, it can't get any better than this. I mean, it was just there. So first it was the visualization of, most people are visual, of what's important to them. So for me, when I saw that, again, it was freedom of the time. So I think number one is it has to be your goals. It has to be something you're really burning, passionate about. And number two, you got to really put it under a time horizon, no matter what it is. So
to keep yourself accountable. To
keep yourself accountable, exactly. You can't just say one day I want to make $100,000. You're going to say by December 31st, 2022, I'm going to make $100,000 in a year, or I'm going to save $10,000 by that time period. That makes you accountable and do it, and then you break it up into small steps of how I'm going to do it. If I'm going to lose 10 pounds, okay, I'm going to start doing cardio 3 days a week or lifting 2 days a week, whatever the case may be. And for your work, obviously, it depends on how much are you making now? How much are you saving now? How much are you budgeting? What are you spending your money on? Are there other places that instead of spending it that you can save it and then look at investing, which most people never do. So I'd be walking down these fairways caddying for these guys, and I'd say, okay, someday I'm going to make $50,000 a year, have a condo, and have a Mercedes-Benz by the time I'm 30. And then I change it to $100,000 a year, a condo and a Mercedes by the time I'm 30. And I used to just like whistle it in my head every day going down the fairway. Okay, I did it at 28. Okay, and then I said, okay, what's the next goal? What's the next goal? What's the next goal? So it really wasn't pressure on myself. It was something I was visualizing. And most of the great teachers that I've studied say, cut out a picture of the thing or the item that you want, or even maybe it's a picture of how you want to look or perceive yourself, and cut it out and put it and make a storyboard of everything that's important to you. I want to live in this kind of house. I want to dress, a certain way. I want to take a trip to Italy and this thing, and cut those things out. And chances are you'll have a much better chance of doing that, if you do it. But the big thing is not to be pressured by your family, because it is you and your goals. Your family might say, I want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, the prestigious thing, where you say, well, no, my path is really over here.
Yeah.
So I think it's sticking up for, really what's important to you. But I think goal setting is crucial. I'd say probably 80% of people aimlessly wander in life, take what life throws at them, instead of them planning out, this is how I want my path of my life to go. Doesn't mean it's going to go perfect, but if you've got the areas out there that you want to go in, you'll be much better chance of getting there.
Speaking of direction, I want to get your thoughts on this. So I've found in my life personally, and I've kind of seen that it seems like it would help in other people's life. If you just set a goal that I want to do this by this time, how do you approach it psychologically? Because if you just think, oh, I'm going to do it, and if I don't, I'm a failure, it's kind of like a you get it or you don't situation. But you never know, like if you set your goal in 3 months, in those 3 months, your life might completely change where that goal is no longer relevant. So you have to be flexible in a way, but not in a way that you're constantly letting yourself slack off. So like, how would you, because you don't want to just set a goal in a way that it gives you no other room for anything else, but at the same time you want to have a sense of direction. So would you agree that goals are more of a way to set your direction and your path of where you're going towards, but it's not necessarily the destination?
Without a doubt. You have to enjoy the journey. You have to know that every little step is important. In sales, for example, my dad used to say every no leads to a yes. So you may have 80 or 90 failures. Did you learn from those failures? Did you learn how to approach people better? Did you learn how to listen better? Did you learn how to discuss your product or service better? Okay, if you did, you'll probably be more successful. If you didn't learn anything, well, or maybe it just wasn't the right goal for you. Maybe it wasn't really in your heart a passion that you were willing to put forth the work or study and learn to be able to do, or working out. I mean, again, I was a basketball player. Some guys never practiced and never worked or were out of shape. I was there every day practicing, and if you want to get good, that's what you have to do. So I think it's the same way with any goal that you have. Is like, what is it going to take, and research that. So for real estate, for me, it was understanding the market and understanding people, understanding really good listening skills to be able to ask the right questions, to draw out from them, having them trust you and know that you're there for their best interest. I think that is really key. So that listening and inquiring, what I always say is the who, what, why, when, and where. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the journey, is the destination as much as the goal itself.
And we're not robots. Like it's not a failure to reevaluate your goals. It's actually a smarter thing to do because you're not going to waste time.
You could get the position you think is the position of your life, and 2 weeks into it, you can say, I know this is a mistake. This isn't for me. You thought you wanted to work in a big high rise and wear a suit and tie every day. And when you got there, you'd say, you know what? I'd rather be casual and come and go when I please. So again, there's no right or wrong. It's your goals. It's your life. And the sooner you understand that yes, it's okay to make choices. There used to be a stigma about changing jobs and careers. I actually think that's totally gone now. As long as you're doing the best effort.
All the time.
Yes, as long as you're doing your best effort and you're leaving on good terms, I think somebody would respect you more to say, look, I want to be fair to you. This just isn't in my heart, and I'm going to go try something else. I don't think anybody can get upset with you, for doing that.
So change up the gears a little bit. A lot of entrepreneurs are going to be commission based, or their income is based on whether they get a next project or not. I know a lot of the listeners that are listening, they're actually realtors, which is one of the popular things in Columbus, and it's straight commission. And I know you have experience with this. In regards to discipline and goal setting, how can somebody like a realtor or somebody else that's doing commission, how can they make sure that they're keeping their money? Because it's always so easy to just know that, I'm getting my next 3 checks, I'm just going to start spending. How do you keep yourself accountable? How do you make sure you're staying sober-minded in that kind of aspect?
Well, it's probably the most difficult. If you're not disciplined, you'll never make it. I mean, I hired a lot of people that talked a big game that didn't last a week, a month, 6 months because of that. So number one is, the hardest thing to realize in life is the material things don't bring happiness. And almost all of us, unless we grew up with a lot of money, it's one of the first things we want to do is go buy, no matter what it is. Shoes, clothes, bigger house, bigger car, better suits, whatever it is. And having grown up with nothing, obviously I wanted some of that when I first got out, but it was really quick for me to be able to tell that wasn't it. But that's hard, and some people have to learn that before they do it. So every dollar you spend, you have to ask, is this a want or a need? And then again, going back to your goals, how much of every check are you going to save? How much do you really need to live off of? And especially when you're first getting started, if you don't have a 6 or 8 month cushion of expenses, you're really going to put yourself behind the 8 ball, because when you're getting started, I had a really good mentor, and he told me 2 things that really stick with me to this day. if you try to earn before you learn, you get burned. So if you don't have the solid foundation of learning of what you need to do, and that takes at least 6 or 8 months, and in the commercial end, it really took well over a year. Mm-hmm. The other thing he told me, it was like going back to get your MBA. Look at the first 2 years like going back to get your MBA. Learn all you can, build that solid foundation, and then you'll be a rock star from there and it'll really take off. And that's exactly what happened to me. I pretty much starved the first 18 months. I lived really simple.
So you just, whatever money was coming in, you're like, okay, cool, I just need to focus on bettering myself.
Correct. I building the foundation and building the pipeline.
Your goal is not to just start living more comfortably.
No, not at all. I lived in a small apartment. I had a small Honda car. I had 2 or 3 suits, and that was it. Pretty bare bones on there. It was meeting people, learning the market. Okay, so the work ethic, it's not going to get done in 40 hours a week. I probably worked 60 plus hours, 20, 25 years on that. And again, a big chunk of that trying to be as much time face to face. And again, when I got started, it was well before 12 years or whatever before the internet and before cell phones. So, it was seeing people in face to face as much by developing relationships. And then at the same time, spending a great deal of time understanding the market and that in every market and every niche in the market for those people in real estate, or no matter what you're selling, is different. You have to know your market, you have to know your product or service, and that takes time. But the biggest thing is like you're almost like a psychologist to understand what drives and motivates people. Is this person a relationship person or a transaction person? Are they only going off getting a better price, or do they want a relationship? I want a long-term relationship. So I've tried to really guide my whole life from a relationship approach to business, not just from a cost approach, and probably align myself with clients that were along those same lines on there. But you have to look at every purchase of that. Is this something I really need, or is it just a want? And many books and things will say, let it go for 30 days, and if it's still that there, it may be worth saving for, but not just blowing it. But every time you would get a check, if it's more than what your basic needs are, then you got to say, do I want to put this away for investment to have a better life in the future? And again, are you disciplined? Will you sacrifice on that? Or are you just going to live for today? Well, too many people live for today, and that's why with this government shutdown right now, that they're all wanting the government handouts longer because they never saved.
Because they live paycheck to paycheck. I think 80 or 75% of Americans.
Yeah. Some huge percentage only have $450 of savings.
Really?
Is what I read. So no matter what it is, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're spending it all. You're not looking at every dollar, or maybe you're underemployed and not making enough because you haven't spent the time getting the right education or training to become better at what you do, or more, maybe you're in the wrong industry or job where you need to take that risk like I took it. Now, I was single, I was young, I had no bills, I had no ongoing monthly bills, so I could do that fairly easily. I barely had any furniture when I moved from California to here, so it wasn't like I had a huge moving bill to move.
I think what's interesting is that, especially entrepreneurs, they're starting something that's risky. They might have something to prove to people, especially people that might have doubted them. So there's always this temptation of, I want to buy something cool to prove to people that I'm successful in business. And I think that's a thing that you need to really stay away from, because
ego is huge in life. It's very hard, and you'll see all the time. You can't worry about other people's opinions, and that's
the things you're buying. It's not even. You have to check if it's even for yourself. You
Correct.
might even be doing it for other people, and if that's the case, you definitely don't want to buy that.
It is probably one of life's toughest lessons. It could be jewelry, again, could be a fancy car, fancy clothes, country club membership, whatever it is. And again, being practical, growing up with nothing. I love golf as much as anybody. Some of the nicer courses in town are $50,000 and $100,000 to join. I can afford that now, but I don't do it.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, when you think about it, you could never play that, but do you want to be around other super, very wealthy or successful people? So every decision you make like that in life, if you're not having people in your car where you're taking them around, and today people don't, you probably don't have to spend as much money on the car. Half of my family drives Subarus that are incredible cars that are $25,000 that last a very long time. So you don't need to go out and, again, on that. So it's looking at every decision. It would obviously be much better if they put money in the stock market or in real estate where they could get dividends and long-term appreciation and returns than buying things that the minute they buy it depreciate in value.
So we'll go to the other side of the coin of saving and then spending, obviously. But we talked about this earlier, and I know that this is important for entrepreneurs especially, or even not even entrepreneurs, people that are having a regular job. As they make money, it's the process. I think Robert Kiyosaki teaches this. You don't spend your principal money on things, but you instead, like you said, invest, and whatever interest comes from that investment, you spend on the more material things that don't really bring.
Correct. Get your assets to produce income.
Yeah, can you talk about that?
So basically, Robert Kiyosaki, for the people that don't know him, is somebody I've always followed. He wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and many other books. He was homeless twice, first of all.
Oh, really?
Twice.
Didn't know that.
So his dad, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, his dad was a professor in Hawaii, had every degree and designation, was a bigwig, I think a college professor. And when he retired, he got his gold watch, and he basically had nothing, a simple retirement income. His poor dad was his best friend's dad that walked around in jeans and a t-shirt.
His rich dad.
His rich dad, owned apartment buildings, a laundromat, the corner of a convenience store, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he taught Robert and his best friend basically the whole way of doing it by making him work for the rich dad for free, by learning all these tasks and seeing firsthand how he made all this money. Mm-hmm. So number one, he instilled the work ethic in him. Sweeping floors, just cutting yards, just doing every tough job there was. A lot like I had to do, just stuff like, God, I don't want to do this. Well, you don't want to do it, but it really breeds that work ethic. Everything else is pretty easy after you've worked 12 hours on a machine shop. Mm-hmm. Okay? So
sitting at a computer is not that hard.
Yeah, no, definitely not. So it taught him that there are other ways in life. It taught them about the power of real estate, of taking a little money, putting it in something, getting a loan, and getting dividends or interest or passive income for life, or taking a small asset that grows to a large asset. And nobody can predict what the market's going to do. But obviously that's understanding the market to buy it right and making sure you're getting it. But here's a man that's now worth hundreds of millions of dollars that, again, was homeless twice, mm-hmm. that started it, worked hard, saved, invested, and really built something. And that's the beauty of real estate, is anybody can do it. And I've met thousands of people around the country from every walk of life that started with nothing, that did it. And I'm obviously living proof on a small scale. There's people that have done 1,000,000 times more than I have, because maybe they've had a bigger risk tolerance than I've had, or got more partners, or whatever the case may be. But starting yourself, the first part of starting is every dollar you bring in, deciding, I want to have a better future, and putting that aside versus going and buying something. Mm-hmm. Because you may have
delayed gratification.
That's right. It's delaying gratification. It's being disciplined. So you could have a lot of stuff and never have any assets, or you can then acquire a lot of assets that will give you money to buy the stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's what wealthy people do that most poor people don't do. If they learn that lesson alone of making that choice, mm-hmm. and yes, it's discipline, and yes, it takes longer, but it will change your life forever.
That's great. That's awesome. And so, kind of moving towards the spending side, what, in your experience, would you recommend to people that want to go and spend some money? Would you recommend like debt? Or, because I know people always say debt's bad, a lot of people say, especially for consumer debt, but that's all theory. I know that you would have experience with it, so what would you say on that part?
Well, there's good debt and bad debt.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm young, I'm going to tell you to buy a duplex, live in one half, and rent the other half out. Or buy a fourplex and live in one and rent the other, 3 out on that. getting those loans, that's good debt. Credit card debt is bad debt. Number one, the interest rate's extremely high.
Yeah.
And you get into that, and sometimes it takes years and years to get out of it, and that whatever item you bought for whatever the price is now just went up threefold because of that continued interest that compounded over that. So that really gets back to, to discipline. Different property types take different amounts to put down to buy. And so, the good debt would be as you're using other people's money, whether it's the bank or private lenders, hard money lenders, whatever, to help you acquire assets, that then you'll get income off that, plus you'll pay down, that loan, get very good tax write-offs that are all legal, through the government, and help you, grow your net worth.
What would you recommend for people that do want, you mentioned like investing in their properties, what would be a good amount to leverage? Because you mentioned you paid off your property, like where you lived, to not have any leverage, to you don't have any risk. What would you recommend? Because some people think that 20% might be too risky. They recommend just paying off everything right away. If you invest it, what do you think?
Well, I guess because I'm a little old school, right now you can get into properties that you're living in for very little down. I mean, number one, interest rates are at a historic low.
Yeah.
My first property that I bought was 17% interest. My first home I bought was almost 9%. You can get something for like, 2.5 today? Very, very low. So I would try to get in something as quick as possible. I mean, if you're disciplined and can get in for less than 20%, I'm going to take that difference. Let's say you got in for 5 or 10. I'd take that, 15 or 10% difference and invest that to try to build up to get another property. Rather than just blow it. So most commercial deals, bigger than 4 units or something, you're having to put 20 to 30% down. So you need a bigger down payment, or you need to get a partner or partners or a group, to buy something, which opens up more opportunities for you. And that's a totally different discussion of whether you're comfortable just wanting it on yourself or with family members or friends or total strangers that just have the same goals that you have. On there, but I don't think there's a right or wrong of how much you're putting down. It's getting back to your risk tolerance and how conservative or risky you are with what happens to that property if the income stops coming in. How long can you carry the property if the tenant or tenants go belly up? Yeah. Okay.
So, because I've talked with some people my age, even older, and they're not sure whether, because they say they do want to get into investing into real estate. They're not sure whether they even want to do debt at all. What would you say to people that recommend no debt at all? I know it's a lot slower, but
it lowers the percentage of the properties you can buy. There's just not that many properties out there that low price that you can just go in and pay cash, unless you're really wealthy to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you just said, I'm going to spend $100,000 to $200,000 and buy an investment property, well, guess what? There's just not that many of those out there. And guess what? There's thousands of people looking at that price point. Thousands. So the competition is really high. You're not going to get a good deal on it. Even if you pay cash, you're going to have competition, but the seller is probably not. They're probably selling it at a premium because it's such a hot market right now for that. So I'm going to say, don't pay all cash. You could put 30% down to be a little more leverage that protects you a little bit more. But again, be disciplined enough with that other 70% if you have that, and save it for the next one, or have a minimum of 6 or 8 months to cover it if a tenant would leave.
For the mortgage.
For the mortgage. So I'll give you a good thing. I mean, I've got a lot of different properties. Right now we've got a strip center that 6 of the tenants closed their doors. One of them went belly up. Our mortgage is really high, and we have about 8 months reserve saved up because we didn't pay out all the dividends over time. We held some back for the loan and that. Now, after the 8 months, if we don't get it done, we're either going to have to refinance the property, or we're going to have to come out of pocket for each investor that's invested in it, which is called a cash call that nobody wants to have happen. We want to get dividends. We don't want to have to be writing the property a check. So that's the other side that most people don't think of. Okay, what happens if the tenant goes belly up? All right, what happens if there's repairs that are needed? that were unforeseen. You need a new HVAC system that costs $10,000. Now what? The roof needs to be done. The parking lot needs to be done. Whatever the case.
Have that reserve pool.
You need to have that reserve pool. So because most people aren't experts in this, and that's certainly not an area of my expertise, I bring in experts to make sure we get inspections done that's going to say, this is what the roof's like, this is what the floor load's like, this is what the parking lot's like, this is what the HVAC's like. Are there any unseen issues that we're not thinking about? Could be something like traffic and getting in and out. So I've studied all those aspects of property that most people that buy on their own have never done that. So usually they're making a mistake and then they're having to come out of pocket. So it's better to have that reserve to save that rather than you losing the property.
So I'm kind of excited to ask you this question. For people that do want to get into investing into real estate, what would you recommend? Would you recommend any strategy, especially in Columbus specifically, since you know this area so well? If let's say I want to start investing into real estate, maybe some people would start with a single family home. You mentioned a duplex, and eventually the goal is to get to commercial real estate. How would you recommend? What kind of tips do you have for that?
Well, I think it's learning the market and learning the process. I think it's probably easier with a single family home. And obviously when you start, the lower price ones are going to be in areas that may be a little difficult. So you're going to have to really know those areas and say, how much is crime going to affect, right? There. And today, who knows? I mean, that's a very big thing to look at. So it's probably easiest to get into a single family, a duplex or a fourplex of that. That's what probably 90% of people look at doing. The big thing I see that people make the mistake on is that they try to manage it themselves and they don't have those skills. You can be a very smart individual, you can be a very handy individual, doesn't make you a good property manager. And I learned that lesson very quick about 20 years ago, and I'm not handy, nor am I a property manager. So I learned right away that I was going to hire an expert to do that kind of work, and most people don't want to spend that money when really that may be the best investment you make, to partner or have somebody that's an expert in those areas. Because you either do it on the cheap and then it affects the value of the property, it's not done right, it's not done to code, you get caught for a code violation and then you're paying fines, or you're losing the tenant. And I had somebody buy an office building, tried to manage it themselves, lost the major tenant in the building, ended up losing the building back to the bank.
That's actually interesting, because if you go back to the goal of freedom and basically having a lifestyle where you get to choose what you do, if you're investing into real estate without a property manager, you're spending so much time, and you're the one that's the first to pick up the phone if something's wrong. It's basically the opposite of what you wanted.
That's
getting
right.
Into this.
Property manager is so hands-on. When I teach classes around the country, it's the biggest thing I try to make people understand. That is as good of and as most important as an expense as having the right attorney, the right accountant, the right banker. You have a team of people helping you out. Okay? A real estate attorney, an accountant that understands real estate, a commercial banker on there, a property manager, a contractor. You want people, the relationships in those areas, that when you have a question or a call, but yeah, you don't want to call at 2 a.m. when the tree fell down on the house or the plumbing broke. Okay? You just don't want that, so just like you said, your time, if you value your time is worth more than what you'd pay that good property manager.
So a lot of people would object to what you're saying, and they would say, not only is it going to take profits monthly, but I also don't trust the property manager because they might do things more expensive than I would do them. What would you say to that? Or I guess you would say find a better property manager. But
well, again, it's a relationship. If it's somebody you're only using once in a while, trust takes time to develop. What's their reputation? Is it somebody that's been doing it for a while? And why should they work with you? If they're really good, they may be too busy to work with you. So I think finding those kind of people today is probably pretty difficult because the market's so hot. So it's a very valid question. But again, for somebody like me that's not handy, that doesn't know that, you're shooting in the dark. You're going to cost yourself more money. You're not going to make money doing that. And if you want the property's cash flow to appreciate or the building value to appreciate, you're not going to have it done if it's not done in the right manner.
So what, in your experience, could you kind of see as pointers that really point out that this person isn't the right one, especially not even for property managers, but also I guess this will work for contractors too.
Well, I think it's, again, trust in your gut, getting recommendations from other people that are there. I mean, I always tell people, go interview 2 or 3 people in every area. So you might go meet a real estate attorney and one guy's $800 an hour, one's $200 an hour. Well, you don't need an $800 an hour attorney very often. When you do, you want to know the one to use, but most of the time a $200 an hour attorney is fine. I mean, same thing with accountant. Accountant's going to make or break your taxes. You want a really good one. So if it's one thing you're going to spend on, that's it. I've had the same accountant for 35 years, okay? And they do a great job for me, keeping track of it. So I would say the track record of the person, and have they been working in the niche of the type of properties that you're wanting to purchase. So a single family home is going to be different than a duplex, is going to be different than a mixed use building, different than an office building, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody that's working in the inner city project may be totally different than working on a suburb project. So that takes time to interview those people, but you want to know that they have the experience doing it. And you want to ask those questions up front. You want to get everything in writing. You know, hopefully they've got letters of recommendation or that. But then I think a lot of it is really trusting your gut. And sure, you're going to get burned if you're not careful on there. But a lot of people that try to do it themselves get burned even worse. And again, I've got hundreds of nightmare stories I can tell you by people that have, including myself.
So before we get to the last question, or actually before we get to the last game that we were going to do, the word game, I want to ask you one more question. In terms of, besides real estate, what other investment opportunities would you recommend? There's so many things out there that you could do. What would you recommend for people?
Well, again, it gets back to how much money do they have? What's their timeline horizon? Short or long? Short, 2 years or less. Long term, 5, 7 years and longer. What's their risk tolerance? If 1 is super conservative and 10 is super risky, what's going to let you sleep at night? What's going to keep you up at night? So getting the answer to those questions is going to answer really, what should I have my funds in? So a money market or a CD is super conservative. Some mutual funds are middle of the road. Stocks can be more risky, okay? So I'm in all of those. I'm in money market for some short-term funds. I don't have CDs, but I've got stocks, I've got mutual funds, I've got bonds on there. I'm not in gold or crypto or anything like that, but a lot of people are really selling those. I don't know enough about those to give you an educated answer, but I'm getting badgered by people wanting to sell me those right now, so it must be becoming more popular. In that end, you want to get a fee-only financial planner to listen to what your goals are, how much money you have, again, what your timeline horizon is, to help advise you with that. And I actually have 2 people that I work with, one that does mainly mutual funds and one that does mainly stocks, that listen to what my goals are, that help guide me to where to put funds in those places.
What's a fee only?
Fee only means they're not selling you something. They're getting a fee based on, as your value of your portfolio grows, they get a fee off of that. They're not saying buy XYZ stock and then they get a big hit off it, or buy this certain annuity and they get a big commission off of it, okay? So anytime you go to interview a financial planner, a stockbroker, you want to know. So just like I'm a buyer's only broker for commercial real estate, you want that same type of person advising you on stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Makes a big difference.
All right, so the last thing we're going to do is the word game. And it basically, you probably already know what it's like. So just, you're going to name a couple words, and you're going to just say the first thing that comes to your mind. So the first word is actually, that's right in there, family.
My son.
Freedom.
Choices.
Legacy.
My son.
Money.
Freedom.
It's like a circle.
It is a circle.
And the last one is, what was it? Career.
Helping others.
Perfect. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching this or listening to this podcast brought to you by Orange Visuals. Greg, I actually was thinking about this. If you know the soldiers, when they have the badges here and all the little awards that they get. I feel like that's what you are in terms of the real estate community, because you have so many. If you ever look yourself up online, you have so many different clubs and awards you've gotten. It's like if you had one of those uniforms in a real estate, that's probably what you'd look like.
I never thought of that. Well, thank you. I'm always happy to help people that want to be the best they can be. And again, I think I'm a living testimony that, again, I started off with totally nothing. At 21, I had zero. I mean, I really did on there. You got to want it bad enough. You got to be disciplined. You got to be willing to work hard, and you can live the American dream.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yep. Thank you.